Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. Today's a super special episode. It is episode 123, but it's also celebrating 2 years of the Debt Rebel podcast. So I am incredibly grateful for you and your attention, your ears, your encouragement, your feedback, so many things, because this show has been such a fun way for me to download a lot of the things that are going on in my mind. But also, if you have been with me since the very beginning, my journey continues to develop. And so I started out sharing my story and then some more of my clients' stories. And now I'm diving in a little bit deeper on the ADHD side, because that's something that I learned about myself and how challenging it could be, especially if you're raising a family, to manage that and your money, ADHD symptoms, all of the things. And so I just want to say thank you for listening, because it's because of you that I continue to dive deeper into my story, but also to share what I have learned along the way. And my ultimate goal is that anyone that listens to this show doesn't feel shame about the way they have made money choices in the past, because it's stuff that we make the best decisions we can in the moment based on the information we have. And so that's kind of how I have learned in my journey, but also not just in my debt elimination journey, but in parenting and all the things. And so I hope that that's an encouragement to you. And thank you. I love celebrating milestones, but this is a really fun one for me, because I started out making this a podcast just for one family, and it's been amazing to hear the stories of transformation and encouragement, and the families that have felt hopeful about their financial situation again. And so today's going to be a little bit different of an episode, because I want to talk about more of the mindset shift. Because for us in my journey, my husband and I, our goal was to be debt free. And then that is definitely a destination, but it isn't necessarily the finish line, because once we got to that spot, then we learned how to stop surviving and start building our wealth. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, because this is a celebration. But also, I know that if you've been listening to this show for a while and you've been implementing some of these things, that you are getting closer and closer to that day where you can say, I'm debt free. And so sometimes we need to stop and look at what's next, and think a little bit more, dream a little bit about what's possible, so that we can continue going on. Because and like we do inside the membership, we encourage each other, because this is not something that we should do alone. I know our culture says a lot, like we shouldn't talk about money, and other topics that can be polarizing. And so I think that's another thing that's really important, is to just keep the conversations going, because this is the stuff, when we are honest with ourselves and where we are, that we can move forward. And when we ask questions, I say there's no such thing as a stupid question, except for the one that you didn't ask. So ask the questions. So I also want to share a special invite with you. If you haven't had a chance to jump in and book one of the free Borrow My Brain sessions with me, I would absolutely love to have a conversation with you. Just a quick video chat, something that is keeping you stuck with your finances and helping you move past that. So there's no obligation after that. I just want to know how I can help you and encourage you in your money journey. So take a look at the show notes. That information will be there, and you can book that session. But today we're talking about debt-free not being the finish line, but how to shift from that mindset of survival to starting to build that wealth. And so maybe you're listening today and you're like, I'm not there yet. It's okay. Let's pretend like you are. Put yourself in the shoes of the debt-free version of you, and we can start thinking and dreaming about what is next, because this is also an important way to help us rewire our brains to know that it's possible, and to keep us moving forward. Okay, so for us, it took us 6 years to get out from underneath our $107,000 in debt. And one of the big things of that is because I didn't know that someone like myself, a financial coach, existed to help me get through that, help us get through it, help us create a plan that made sense for our family at the time. And so one thing that was really interesting for me is I was like, I could see, and I knew it was going to be great to not have to pay, $1,000 in a month in debt payments, or be able to use that money for something else, or just be able to say, hey, let's just buy that, and know that it wasn't going to overdraw our account. But some of the strange things that showed up that were really, I didn't necessarily like fully comprehend until we got there. was the fact that when I log in to pay my bills, because I wasn't doing auto pay at the time, when I logged in to pay my bills, there were less bills to pay, which was really a weird thing. But I was like, this is so great. It doesn't take me long. And now I just make sure that those auto pays are, still going through. It's super simple. But having extra money available to just, we see something that we wanted to buy and we had that in our budget and we just buy it. Or going to the grocery store and filling up your cart with food for our family and then getting to the checkout and not having to feel nervous about, is my card going to work or not? So some of these things are when you are in those moments of survival and then you shift to that moment where you're like, I don't have to be there anymore. It's not something, just like it wasn't something that happened overnight to get into debt. It's going to take some time to move through that and get past that survival mode feeling. So today I want to talk about why debt-free doesn't automatically create wealth, why a scarcity mindset that many families carry after debt payoff happens, how our ADHD brains can get stuck in that survival mode, area, and how about the mindset shifts and systems that will help that financial freedom last. So first off, why debt freedom can feel weird. So for years, it's just like I compared it a lot to when I graduated from college. So I, from a very young age, was told, college was necessary. It was something that I needed to do. I went to college. That was the goal. That was kind of like the finish line. And then I graduated and I didn't know what to do. And that's where I started to flounder because I didn't have a clear next step. And so the same thing can happen for families after they go through that debt payoff journey, because having a clear mission and vision for what's next is going to help, because you'll always know what that next goal is, where when you get extra money, where it should go, and what success looks like to you and your family. So when you're going through that debt payoff journey, you have all of those things. So when you've reached that status and those things, they go away, some common feelings, and I have experienced these myself. Maybe there is a little bit of anxiety because you feel like you should continue to do those things, even though you're in a different stage of the journey. Maybe it's a fear of making mistakes. This one was a huge one for me. I'm always afraid of making a mistake, even though I make them all the time and everything is figure outable. Another thing that happens is families can start hoarding cash because we want to feel stable, even though we're not having to make those monthly debt payments. Or another thing that can happen is that overspending, because it's a reward. We've earned it. We have reached that status of debt free, and then we want to celebrate it, right? So there's some ways that you can celebrate without overspending. And then just that lack of direction, like what's next? Debt freedom removes a problem, but it doesn't automatically create a vision. So that's why it's very important to create that vision. And our ADHD brains thrive on urgency. Debt creates an urgency because we know someone is going to say, hey, you owe us money. But wealth building requires consistency, and that's a completely different skill set. And so that's where we have to work on retraining our brains for this next stage of the journey. So one of the things I mentioned was the scarcity trap. And we talked about this in an earlier episode I did with Doug Johnson with Thrivent Financial. So I'll put the show notes, or I'll put the link in the show notes for that episode. It's a good one to check out. But many people become debt-free financially, but then we can feel like we're still trapped emotionally. So here's some signs that you might still be operating from that scarcity mindset. So constantly feeling like there isn't enough, or fear of spending money on anything. Maybe you're not sure where to invest. Or you have guilt when enjoying your money, or you think one setback is going to ruin the entire thing. So my question for you is, do you still make financial decisions like you're drowning, even if you've reached the shore? So something that we can reframe our brains with is when we think, I can't afford it, the new question that we could be asking ourselves is, does this align with my new priorities? Instead of, what if I lose everything? What if we ask ourselves, how can I continue building stability? Because scarcity asks how to survive, but wealth asks us how to grow. Another point is this identity shifts. This identity shift that happens when we go from a person that is paying off debt to the person that's not paying off debt anymore. So this is a big one because this is a bigger change that isn't just about your bank account. This comes down to your identity and how you see yourself. So maybe for years you have said things like, I'm broke, I'm bad with money, I'm trying to get out of debt. Those labels are no longer true. And I would encourage you, even if you aren't debt free yet, is those labels don't serve you either. Some new statements that you can use to rewire your brain and to say, hey, I am a wealth builder. I'm a planner. I'm a steward of my money. I make intentional financial decisions. I create opportunities for my family. The reason why saying these things matter is because we act when we are aligned with who we believe that we are. So a person maybe that's trying to lose weight acts differently than someone who identifies as healthy. And that same principle we can apply to our money. So when we tell ourselves, and that's the other thing too, is I used to hear this a lot. I haven't heard it so much lately, but our brains don't necessarily, when we say something, our brains don't necessarily know if we're telling it the truth or a lie. And so if we say these I am statements or these things about ourselves that we want to shift and rewire our brains to think differently, that's when we are rewriting that for ourselves and what we think in those identity statements for ourselves. All right, so how about some new goals for this wealth building phase of your life? Because debt payoff was only one chapter, and now your money has a new job to do. So this is where you can really start to take the governor off of your dreams and say, what are we going to do? Maybe you start building investments. And so I would highly encourage you, if that's the stage that you're in, is to reach out to a financial advisor and talk about your retirement, maybe getting some brokerage accounts set up and creating that long-term wealth for you and your family. Maybe it's increasing your margin and making that emergency fund bigger so that you have more flexibility and reduce stress in your life because you have a bigger reserve ready for you. Another thing that's really important to think about is that family legacy. What are the things that you are teaching your kids? And it's not necessarily handing down a trust fund or anything like that, but teaching your kids solid foundation for managing their money so that you can create that generational wealth for you and your family. Maybe it's giving generously and modeling that for your kids. Sometimes it is choosing a totally different lifestyle as well. So you have more time freedom. Maybe you can choose a different career if you want to, travel experiences. This is where you can really start to create a different life for yourself that matches maybe only something that you've dreamt about in the past. Because debt freedom gives you options, but wealth building helps you use those options. So how do we create these in an ADHD friendly way? So wealth isn't built through motivation, it's built through systems. So you'll hear me talk a lot about systems on this show, especially if you've been listening for the last 2 years. Systems are super important. So automating that investing, automating those savings transfers, having regular check-ins on your money, and then having a tracker so that you can see how your net worth continues to grow. Because one thing I know about myself, and if you're listening to this show, this might apply to you as well, is we should not rely on remembering. So let's reduce the number of decisions we have to make, automate that success, especially if it aligns with what matters most to us. So the less your wealth building depends on willpower, the faster it will grow. So if you're in the space where you have said, you have paid off your debt, or maybe you're not living with any of that anymore. Maybe you just started listening to the show for some money management tips. I want to take this moment to celebrate with you. If you haven't had a chance yet to celebrate this new status of being debt-free, take the time to do it. It's a huge accomplishment. My husband and I renewed our wedding vows, and it was such a fun celebration to be able to surround ourselves with people that had been really instrumental in our journey to who we were at that point. We had been married for 10 years, and it was they didn't know that they were supporting us in the way that they were, but it was really important that we celebrated that and showed other people that it was really possible to live debt-free in today's world. But don't stop there. So the goal isn't just becoming debt-free. It is creating a life with options and flexibility and peace for yourself and your family. Now, if you're someone that is like, hey, this sounds really good, Jewlz, but I'm not debt-free yet and I need some help, I want to extend a personal invite to you for the Alliance Coaching membership. That's where we build these habits and these systems that are going to help you eliminate that debt, build that emergency fund so that you can get to work on creating that wealth for you and your family, so that you can stop worrying about living paycheck to paycheck and go from surviving to thriving. Before we sign off today, I want to know what would change in your life if you stopped thinking like someone trying to get out of debt and started thinking like someone building wealth. Thanks for listening to today's episode. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Debt Rebel Show today. Ready to take your family budgeting to the next level? Stop that paycheck to paycheck grind and start living debt-free? Head over to my website, debtrebelpodcast.com. That's DEBTREBEL podcast.com to grab resources, tools, and tips to make it happen. And don't forget, subscribe, leave a review, and if you know another family that would love hearing today's episode, it would be such a gift for both of us, your friend and me, if you share this episode. And remember, your debt-free life starts with one brave step, and I'm cheering you on every step of the way. We'll talk soon, Debt Rebel.